Hello to all you parishioners of St. Michael Parish. It's good to be with you this evening, and this will be shown during the Masses tomorrow as well. Thank you for the invitation to speak with you as we share in this Called to Service Christ campaign, which was begun a couple of years ago and is now in its last stage. And I speak from my perspective as a woman religious. I am a Sister of Providence, and there are a number of communities that will benefit from this campaign. We ourselves are one of the 7 legacy communities, and by that we mean those communities who arrived and began to minister in the Archdiocese before 1900. And so I'll be additional sisters as well who arrived sometime after that, and we're here for a shorter amount of time. But the 7 legacy communities are still here. As you may know, of course, we Sisters of Providence have served in the Archdiocese since before it was an Archdiocese, but we arrived in Vancouver in 1856, so we've been in the Archdiocese, since that time. We arrived in Olympia in 1881 in August, and in September a school was opened, and it was called St. Amable Academy. The numbers attending grew rapidly, and of course there was a need for more space and so on and so forth. But as you know, and even back then, there were costs included, and at one point the sisters weren't sure they could continue because of the debt on the school. And so in 1926, the pastor, Father Michael O'Dwyer, bought the school from the sisters. The sisters remained and continued teaching in the school, but that's when the name was changed to St. Michael's School. And our sisters were present as teachers until 1973. Going back to when we first came, of course, 6 years after our arrival, St. Peter Hospital was started because of the needs of all of the people in the area. And one of the great needs at that time were probably men, for the most part, who were having accidents because of the timber industry. We know that isn't always a safe way to work, but anyway, the sisters then started St. Peter Hospital, and over time, again, the hospital too, it changed and needed more space, more services, and so on and so forth, until in 1966, they purchased the land on Lily Road. And then the new hospital was built, opened in 1970, and of course it operates to today. Myself, I grew up in the Yakima Valley, and I attended both grade school and high school where our sisters taught. And after high school, I entered the Sisters of Providence. And after my years of formation, teaching was my first ministry. Although I never taught here at St. Michael's School, but I did have an experience which we called our September experience. And I was in college at that time, in the College of Sister Formation, and so they gave us an opportunity to go to the mission, as we called it, go to our different missions, and see how the sisters were teaching or being in hospital work or whatever they were doing. And so I came here to St. Michael's, and I was here for a couple of weeks, and I watched Sister Gilmary teach first grade. Now, I don't know if some of you maybe have been taught by her or remember who she was, but she was a very good teacher, and I subsequently became a teacher for young children in primary grades. There was one other sister who was here but just for a short time that I'd like to mention. In 69 to 71, Sister Bernadette of Providence was the cook for the sisters in the convent. She also spent 6 months here in 1929. So that was a long time ago. I just mentioned her because she was my aunt. Also with me this evening is Sister Beatrice Laframboise, who is here. And she was here at St. Michael's for about 2.5 years. And it was at the time when there were fewer sisters in the convent, and then the decision was made that the sisters would no longer need the convent. And so that happened in 1976. My own teaching ministries, I taught at Our Lady of Lourdes School and St. Joseph's School in Vancouver, Washington, and also at Holy Family School in Seattle. While I was in Vancouver, I was asked to help in the catechetical program for the students at the Washington School for the Deaf, which is our state school there for the deaf students. And after I had that experience, I really felt called to work in deaf ministry. And so in 1977, I was hired by the Archdiocese to work in ministry with deaf people. And I stayed there for 8 years in that work. At that time, after 8 years, I did move out of the Archdiocese for a time. And then I came back to the Archdiocese when I was elected to leadership for the community. And at that time, in returning to Seattle, then I was one of the volunteer interpreters for the deaf people who attend Mass at St. Patrick Parish in Seattle. I left the Archdiocese once again because I was in general leadership in Montreal, but when I returned, the same thing happened. I went back to St. Patrick's Church, and I continue to help to this day to interpret the liturgy for the people who are members at St. Patrick Church. I'm also here in the name of the Archdiocese, of course, and Archbishop Etienne, who extends this invitation to all parishioners to participate in this Called to Service Christ campaign. This campaign, as Father mentioned, is to aid our senior priests and sisters to provide help for their pensions and health care needs into the future. I know that you've probably been introduced to the facts of this campaign and have begun to receive a letter and information from the Archbishop that was sent out at the beginning of this week to ask about your contribution. It's also good to know that a small portion of the funds that are raised will be returned to the parish for your own ministry needs as well. And we know that over the years, sisters in the various religious communities have ministered in schools, hospitals, social work, various meeting, and also in parishes, very definitely, and have responded to issues of social justice. So, but why then do religious communities need this assistance? Formerly, sisters who particularly taught in schools and worked in parishes did not receive a salary as such. It was a stipend. And there were other amenities that were given to them at the same time. But it really wasn't, there was nothing for saving for when you are older. So, in the early 1980s, the Archdiocesan Pastoral Council began to discuss salaries. And so that was a time when things began to change. And so just as your own parents, need medical care or housing as they age, it's the same for us. as religious communities, only we have more. I have more than the older, well, I'm not that young myself, but we do have quite a few older ones, so. And the sisters, who are working and doing ministry in the Archdiocese, if they can get funds to help with the retired sisters, then they can continue in the ministries in which they're involved and not have to do community service work in that sense. Our Sisters of Providence have certainly benefited from the collaboration and the partnerships with priests and laity throughout our time that we have been here in the Archdiocese. And all of us, it helps to live our call, our baptismal call, as we live together in community in the Archdiocese. We know that at this particular time, families, individuals, have many obligations, and you have legitimate needs for your families. And we also recognize this is the time of the pandemic and other economic factors that are right there in front of us. But our hope is that you will really pray about this invitation, and you will find ways to respond generously to the Called to Serve as Christ campaign. In today's gospel from Matthew, we have the story of the landowner who was generous to all his workers, no matter what time they started work during that day. He gave them the same amount. God will be generous to you, whatever you are able to contribute to the campaign. And so I would like to conclude my remarks with a prayer that really is spontaneous to us as Sisters of Providence, and it expresses our confidence in a provident God. Providence of God, I believe in you. Providence of God, I hope in you. Providence of God, I love you with all my heart. Providence of God, I thank you for all. Thank you very much for your attention.